Okay. Yeah.
involved
Yeah.
in the experiments across all of the experiments that we've run. Yeah. And lots, my lab is, I have a ton of really fantastic undergraduate students, many of which are authors on the paper that really spent a lot of time helping to run these experiments. And so there were many different people that were involved in the collection of the data.
And what's your big takeaway here? What is the message in terms of humans and human mothers, and whether or not, obviously there's implications here for like, should a woman consider psilocybin for postpartum depression? All of those things. What would you say to people in terms of the human implications here?
I would say, first and foremost, I would say that mice are not humans, of course, but I do think that what we have uncovered here is, I think it's pretty clear that psilocybin can produce different effects in the postpartum period, possibly related to postpartum hormonal milieu. It can interact potentially with serotonergic changes that are in the brain, and so I think that this doesn't mean that psilocybin won't should be completely not considered in the postpartum period or couldn't ever be a treatment. But I do think that it calls for some caution, and I think it calls for a lot more experiments to better understand how how and why we saw these adverse
Yeah.
effects. We did also replicate the adverse effects twice. So I do feel like this was a really robust change that we see in these animals. But at the same time, we do also know that there is a pharmaceutical company that is running clinical trials right now for a drug that it's not exactly the same thing as psilocybin, but it is relatively
Right.
similar to
Yeah.
psilocybin. And they're seeing efficacy in their early
Yeah.
reports with postpartum depression. And so
Yeah.
I don't, you know, there can be many reasons why we see differences
Yeah. What
in humans and our work, but
Yeah, I think I think what this really reinforces is that the effects of psilocybin are highly context dependent, and if we analogize your experimental setting that you had for your mice to humans, right? What the experiments you did would be more akin to a mother tripping on shrooms at home while her baby's
right.
crying in the next room, not going into a clinic where she knows dad's at home taking care of the kids, everything's okay, and now I can go have this therapeutic type experience. So we need to keep those things in mind when we do experiments in
Absolutely.
humans that show that psilocybin has efficacy, right? We take great care to make sure they're comfortable, they're safe, they've got nothing to worry about. That wasn't the situation that you modeled in mice. It was something that you would easily imagine was a very stressful experience for the mother.
That's absolutely right. And I think that's a really important consideration. And I think that, I mean, it's very possible that we could have seen different effects had we separated infants. So I think from the perspective of really trying to understand what psilocybin is doing in the brain and how it's altering sensory inputs, how it's affecting the HPA axis, and how it might be interacting with hormonal changes. There's so many interesting questions that we can ask there, and we have the ability to manipulate these different things to see how it then produces effects on not only the behavior short term, long term, but also on the neural systems that are responding to um, infant cues.
Is there anything you want to reiterate from our discussion today, or any final thoughts you want to leave people with beyond what we just covered?
Not that I can think of.